Could you condemn your own child to death for a throne you would never sit on yourself? In the heart of the Ottoman Empire, this was not a question of ethics. It was a matter of state policy. A policy written in blood that transformed a palace of breathtaking beauty into the most sophisticated political abattoir in history. A ship slices through the ink-black waters of the Bosphorus, its cargo hold filled not with cinnamon or silk, but with human currency. Young women captured from Genoese trading posts, stolen from the windswept plains of Circassia, plucked from the heart of the Russian steppes. Among them is a girl whose name is about to be systematically erased from memory, replaced by a title that will eventually set an entire empire on fire. She is unaware, as the lights of Constantinople begin to glitter like fallen stars, that she is not a passenger on a voyage to a life of unimaginable luxury. She is a draftee, an unwilling recruit into a perpetual, silent war. A war fought not with scimitars and cannons, but with poisoned sherbet and whispered lies. A war not for land, but for the fleeting attention of a single man. The imperial harem was not a pleasure dome. It was a government in shadow, an academy of intrigue, and a forge for future rulers. Its primary function was to produce an heir, and its primary curse was that it produced too many. The first lesson upon arrival was not etiquette or dance. It was the art of invisibility. A misstep on the polished marble, a glance held for a second too long, a moment of grief noticed by the wrong pair of eyes, and you simply ceased to exist. They say the Bosphorus holds more secrets than the sea holds salt, and a great many of those secrets wear the faces of girls who failed their entrance examination. The institution was governed by a brutal logic codified into law by Sultan Mehmed II, the Conqueror. His infamous decree, the Law of Fatih, was a masterpiece of political pragmatism and monstrous cruelty. It stipulated that whichever of the Sultan's sons ascended to the throne had the legal right, even the obligation, to execute all of his brothers and half-brothers. The goal was simple and ruthless: to prevent the civil wars over succession that had nearly torn the empire apart in its early days. But in solving one problem, the conqueror created a monster. He had turned the harem into a death row for princes and a gladiatorial arena for their mothers. Every concubine who gave birth to a son, a shahzad, was no longer just a woman seeking favor. She was now a player in the highest stakes game on earth. Her son's life depended entirely on her ability to scheme, to plot, to bribe, and to destroy anyone who stood in his path. In the harem, a mother's love was measured in the body count of her rivals. The selection process itself was a cold, calculated affair. Upon arrival, the girls were stripped, their bodies examined by midwives and doctors for any imperfection, any sign of disease, or prior experience that would render them unworthy of the Sultan's bed. They were cattle being inspected for market. Their virginity was their entry fee. Once accepted, their old lives were annihilated. They were given new, often poetic Persian names: Gulbahar, Spring Rose, or Mapaika, Moon-Faced. They were converted to Islam, taught Turkish, and instructed in the delicate arts of music, poetry, dance, and conversation. But this was no finishing school. This was basic training. The true education happened in the whispers between lessons, in the alliances formed in the bathhouses, and in the silent observation of who was rising and who had suddenly vanished. The harem was a pyramid of power, and every woman knew her exact place. At the bottom were the newest arrivals, the novices. Above them were the concubines who had served the Sultan, the Gözde, the favored. Higher still were the Iqbal, those who had borne him children, and at the apex of this female hierarchy, second only to the Sultan himself, was his mother, the Valid Sultan, the undisputed queen of this gilded cage. She was the commander-in-chief of this silent army, and her word was law. Life inside the seraglio was a paradox of opulent imprisonment. The women were surrounded by luxuries beyond the imagination of any European queen. They wore silks threaded with gold, adorned themselves with emeralds the size of pigeon eggs, and ate from porcelain dishes painted with intricate scenes of paradise. Yet they could not take a single step outside the harem walls without permission. They were prisoners of splendor, their world confined to a labyrinth of courtyards, chambers, and gardens. It was a world of profound boredom, punctuated by moments of sheer terror. For every night of pleasure in the Sultan's arms, there were 1,000 nights of loneliness and fear. A rival's success meant your potential demise. The news that another woman was pregnant with a son was not a cause for celebration, but a death knell. Was it any wonder that the smiling faces concealed hearts of ice? In the harem, a smile was as deadly a weapon as poison in a ring, but it acted more slowly. Every gesture was scrutinized, every friendship a potential conspiracy. The chief guardians of this prison were the eunuchs, men robbed of their manhood to ensure the legitimacy of the royal bloodline. They were the eyes and ears of the palace, the silent enforcers of the harem's brutal code. They saw everything, heard everything, and reported everything. To cross a powerful eunuch was to sign your own death warrant. Could you sacrifice your freedom for a chance at power? This question haunted the waking and sleeping hours of every woman within those walls. Most would never even see the Sultan up close, living out their lives in obscurity, weaving tapestries or playing the oud, until they were eventually pensioned off and married to some minor official. But for a select few, for the ambitious, the intelligent, and the utterly ruthless, the harem was not a prison, but a ladder. A ladder whose rungs were made of deceit, betrayal, and sometimes the bodies of their rivals. They understood the fundamental truth of their world. They were slaves, pieces of property. But the master of all property was the Sultan, and the one who controlled the Sultan controlled the world. This was the prize, not love, not happiness, but power. The raw, absolute power to shape the destiny of millions from behind a silk curtain. The women who fought for this prize were not playing for trinkets or titles. They were playing for the lives of their children and for a chance to carve their names into the stone of history. Their battleground was the Sultan's bed, their ammunition was their beauty and their intellect, and their victory would be measured by the number of their enemies who ended up at the bottom of the Bosphorus, sewn into weighted sacks. The Ottoman system, in its cruel genius, had created the perfect environment for ambition to fester and bloom into something magnificent and terrifying. The law of fratricide ensured that the mothers of princes were not just lovers or caregivers. They were generals in a dynastic war that began in the womb, a war that would soon spill out of the harem and engulf the entire empire. The system was designed to keep them powerless, but it accidentally gave them the ultimate weapon: proximity to the absolute monarch. Every word whispered on a pillow, every tear shed at the right moment, every piece of gossip shared in feigned confidence was a political act. A concubine could ruin a grand vizier with a carefully planted rumor, or promote a favored general with a night of manufactured passion. They were the unofficial intelligence service, the secret cabinet, the emotional core of the empire's command structure. They knew the Sultan not as a god-emperor, but as a man with fears, doubts, and weaknesses. And they learned to play upon those weaknesses with the skill of a master musician. The price of failure was, of course, absolute. A woman who fell from favor was relegated to the old palace, a place of exile for disgraced or widowed concubines. It was a living death, a slow descent into forgotten irrelevance. What is more terrifying, a quick death from a rival's poison or a long life in oblivion, far from power and love? This was the choice that faced them every single day. The brutal logic of this world was about to produce an unprecedented historical anomaly, an era when the hand that rocked the cradle would not just influence the household, but would seize the scepter of the empire itself, launching the age of female rule known to history as the Sultanate of Women. This unforgiving world, a blend of prison and palace, raised a fundamental question about the nature of survival itself. Forced into a gilded cage, these women faced a stark choice: become a victim or become a predator. There was no middle ground. Every day was a test of will, a calculation of risk. Their entire existence was a performance, their submission a mask for unyielding ambition. Now put yourself in their place even for a moment. To survive and climb, would you choose to be the whisperer of secrets, the mastermind of a subtle plot, or would you prefer the swift, decisive action of the assassin's dagger? Let us know what path you would take in the comments below. The Sultanate of Women did not begin with a formal declaration or a grand battle. It began with a laugh, the laugh of a captured Ruthenian slave girl whose cheerful disposition was so infectious it earned her the name Harem, the cheerful one. But in the serpentine corridors of the Topkapi Palace, a cheerful laugh was as potent a weapon as a vial of poison. It just took longer to do its work. Suleiman the Magnificent, the lawgiver, the shadow of God on earth, a man whose armies made emperors in Vienna tremble, saw only joy and light in her eyes. His court, his formidable mother, and his first consort, Mahidevran, saw something else entirely, an ambition as boundless and as merciless as the empire he commanded. They were not mistaken. Harem was a political genius wrapped in the guise of a charming concubine. She understood the rules of the game better than anyone before her. She did not just want to be the Sultan's favorite, she wanted to be his only one. And to achieve that, everyone else had to be removed from the board. She was the architect of a revolution that began in the bedroom and ended in the complete upheaval of Ottoman tradition. Harem's first target was the system itself. For centuries, sultans had followed the principle of one concubine mother, one son, moving on to different women to prevent any single one from gaining too much influence. Harem shattered this tradition. She not only bore Suleiman his first son after his heir Mustafa, but went on to give him 5 more children, including a daughter. This serial maternity was a flagrant violation of protocol, but her masterstroke was convincing Suleiman to do the unthinkable, to marry her. A sultan had not legally wed a consort, especially one of a slave background, in over a century. Their marriage in 1533 or 1534 was a political earthquake. She was no longer just a favored concubine, she was Harem Sultan, the legitimate wife of the Padishah, a Haseki Sultan, a title created just for her. Her power was now formalized, her position unassailable. From this fortified position, she began her war. Her primary rival was Mahidevran, the mother of the brilliant and popular crown prince, Mustafa. Harem knew that as long as Mustafa lived, her own sons would face certain death under the law of Fatih. Upon Suleiman's passing, Mustafa had to be eliminated. The campaign against Mustafa was a masterpiece of patient, cold-blooded intrigue. It took years. Harem, allied with her son-in-law, the Grand Vizier Rustem Pasha, began a systematic campaign of whispers and forged letters. They painted Mustafa as a traitor, a dangerously ambitious prince who was conspiring with the Janissaries and the rival Safavid Shah to overthrow his own father. Suleiman, increasingly isolated in his old age and prone to paranoia, began to believe the lies. The climax came during a campaign against Persia in 1553. Mustafa was summoned to his father's tent. He entered, expecting an audience, and was met by the Sultan's mutes, the deaf executioners who carried out royal death sentences with a silk bowstring. Legend says he fought valiantly, but was overwhelmed. Suleiman watched from behind a screen as his firstborn son, the hope of the empire, was strangled to death. The Janissaries, who adored Mustafa, nearly rioted, but Harem's faction had already secured control. With Mustafa gone, the path was clear for her own sons. Her enemies were systematically purged. Her lifelong friend and the Sultan's closest confidant, the Grand Vizier Pagala Ibrahim Pasha, had been executed years earlier after Harem convinced Suleiman he was growing too powerful. In the harem, having friends in high places was good, but being the only friend was better. Hurrem did not just rule the harem, she co-ruled the empire. She corresponded directly with foreign kings, managed vast charitable endowments, and advised Suleiman on matters of state. She was his chief political advisor, his intelligence minister, and his most trusted confidant. She moved the entire imperial harem from the old palace into the grand Topkapi Palace complex, placing it literally at the center of political power. This was a symbolic and practical masterstroke. From her new, lavish quarters, she could monitor the meetings of the Imperial Council, the Divan, through a grilled window. She had created a dynasty within a dynasty, and its power would outlive her. Her methods, a ruthless combination of charm, political acumen, and calculated murder, became the blueprint for the women who followed. Her daughter-in-law, Nurbanu Sultan, a Venetian noble captured by pirates, continued the tradition. Nurbanu ruled as Valide Sultan for her son Murad III, controlling the empire's foreign policy through her contacts with Venice, acting as a de facto foreign minister. The letters between her and Catherine de' Medici of France revealed two masters of the political craft exchanging notes on statecraft. In this world, the gossip of queens could decide the fate of nations. The Sultanate of women reached its zenith of bloody grandeur with Kösem Sultan. Her story makes Hurrem's seem like a gentle prelude. Kösem lived through the reigns of 6 sultans and served as Valide Sultan for 2 of her sons, Murad IV and Ibrahim, and later as regent for her young grandson, Mehmed IV. She was the only woman in Ottoman history to formally hold the title of regent twice. Her rule was not subtle, it was direct, absolute, and drenched in blood. When her son Murad IV became sultan as a boy, she ruled openly in his name. When he came of age and proved to be a brutal tyrant in his own right, she fought to maintain her influence. After his death, her other son, the mentally unstable Ibrahim, known as Ibrahim the Mad, took the throne. Kösem ran the empire while her son indulged his bizarre and decadent whims. But when court officials, tired of Ibrahim's madness, deposed and executed him, they placed his 7-year-old son Mehmed on the throne. This created a crisis. The boy's mother, Turhan Sultan, was young and inexperienced, but she was now technically the Valide Sultan. Kösem, as the boy's grandmother, had no official title, but refused to relinquish power. The result was a war between 2 women inside the palace walls. The Topkapi became a battlefield for 2 rival factions, the supporters of the senior Valide, Kösem, and the junior Valide, Turhan. For 3 years, the 2 shadow governments vied for control, bribing officials and plotting against each other. Kösem controlled the veteran Janissaries, the elite infantry corps that had made and unmade sultans for centuries. Turhan had the support of the chief black eunuch and other key palace officials who were tired of Kösem's long and bloody reign. Kösem, realizing her position was slipping, decided on a final, desperate gamble. She planned to have her 7-year-old grandson, Mehmed IV, poisoned. She would then place another young grandson on the throne, one whose mother was more pliable. The plot was the ultimate act of a woman for whom power had become more precious than family, more vital than blood. In the world of the harem, you either died a hero or lived long enough to see yourself become the monster. Kösem had lived a very, very long time, but the plot was discovered. A servant loyal to Turhan overheard the conspirators and alerted the young Valide Sultan. Turhan acted with a speed and ruthlessness that would have made Hurrem proud. On the night of September 2nd, 1651, her armed supporters stormed Kösem's apartments. The 62-year-old Kösem, the most powerful woman the empire had ever known, was found hiding in a small cabinet. She was dragged out, her jewels and clothes torn from her body, and strangled with a curtain cord by Turhan's men. Her naked body was left outside the harem gates, a gruesome message to anyone who dared challenge the new queen. The era of the Sultanate of women was effectively over, drowned in the blood of its greatest practitioner. The power these women had wielded was astonishing, but it came at a terrible price. They had ruled from the shadows, masters of a game where the only rules were to win or to die. Their legacy was one of brilliant construction projects and savvy diplomacy, but also one of poisoned chalices and silken bowstrings. And watching their every move, orchestrating their rise and fall, was another power within the palace, an invisible army that served no queen but itself, the corps of eunuchs. The whisper of a eunuch could be more powerful than the roar of a cannon. While the Valide sultans and their favored concubines fought their spectacular wars for the throne, a third power operated in the shadows, a silent partner in every conspiracy, a ghost in the imperial machine. These were the eunuchs, the guardians of the harem. Castrated as boys, they were legally considered not men, which allowed them to serve in the women's quarters without threatening the sanctity of the royal bloodline. They were the ultimate insiders, privy to secrets no one else could access. They were despised by the outside world for their physical state, but within the palace walls they commanded terror and respect. At the top of their hierarchy was the most powerful black man in the world, the Kislar Aga, the chief black eunuch. He was not merely a warden. He was a cabinet minister, the administrator of all the holy sites of the empire, a general of the palace guard, and the Sultan's most intimate confidant. His power often rivaled and sometimes surpassed that of the Grand Vizier himself. He was the harem's spymaster, its treasurer, and its executioner. The chief black eunuch controlled a vast network of informants. His agents were everywhere, the eunuchs guarding the doors, the serving girls bringing sherbet, even the gardeners tending the tulips. Nothing happened within the seraglio without his knowledge. He knew which concubine was secretly in love with a palace musician, which pasha was taking bribes, and which prince was plotting against his father. This information was power, and the Kislar Aga wielded it with surgical precision. He could make a woman's career by arranging a coincidental meeting with the Sultan on his way to the gardens. He could destroy her by accidentally letting a forged love letter fall into the hands of the Valide Sultan. The eunuchs were the directors of the harem's deadly theatre, raising some to stardom and sending others to their doom. The rivalry between a powerful Valide Sultan and an ambitious Kislar Aga was the central political drama of the 17th and 18th centuries. It was a battle between two intelligence agencies, a silent war fought in hushed tones in torchlit corridors for control over the mind of the Sultan. A eunuch's loyalty was a commodity, bought and sold for gold and influence, but ultimately they were loyal only to their own survival and power. In a world of shifting allegiances, the eunuchs were the only constant. Their control extended far beyond palace intrigue. The Kislar Aga managed the vast imperial and religious endowments, the waqfs, which made him one of the wealthiest men in the empire. This financial power allowed him to build his own patronage networks, funding mosques, hospitals, and libraries, which in turn increased his public influence and political clout. He controlled the flow of money into and out of the harem, a river of gold that could be used to reward friends and punish enemies. Did a general need funds for a campaign? Did a vizier require a loan to build a new palace? They often had to go through the Kislar Aga. This gatekeeping role made him an indispensable power broker. His apartments within the palace were a center of government, a place where deals were struck and destinies decided. Ambassadors from foreign powers learned that a gift to the chief eunuch was often more effective than a formal treaty with the Grand Vizier. To underestimate the eunuchs was a fatal mistake. They were the living embodiment of a chilling aphorism: those who are seen as nothing often see everything. Theirs was a world of profound contradictions. They were slaves, often captured in raids in Africa, who rose to become the masters of masters. They were physically powerless, yet they wielded immense political power. They were guardians of the imperial family, yet they were often the instruments of its destruction. The act of castration was intended to make them docile and safe. Instead, it often bred a unique form of ambition, a hunger for power, untempered by the distractions of family or dynasty. Their only legacy was the power they accumulated in their own lifetime. A famous case was that of Hatshepsut Aga in the 18th century. He served as Kislar Aga for nearly 30 years, a period of unprecedented influence. He was the de facto ruler of the empire during the so-called Tulip era, a time of cultural flourishing and political decay. He appointed and dismissed Grand Viziers, dictated foreign policy, and was a great patron of the arts. He was so powerful that when he was finally forced into retirement, the state nearly collapsed as the new officials struggled to understand the vast and complex networks of power he had controlled single-handedly. His story is a testament to how the most marginalized individuals in a society could, through intelligence and ruthlessness, climb to the very pinnacle of power. The daily life of a eunuch was as rigidly structured as that of the women they guarded. The black eunuchs who served inside the imperial harem itself were at the top. The white eunuchs, often captured from the Balkans or the Caucasus, served in the outer palace, guarding the bureaucracy in the Sultan's chambers, but were forbidden from entering the inner sanctum. This division created its own set of rivalries and intrigues. The chief white eunuch, the Kapı Aga, was once the more powerful figure, but by the late 16th century, the Kislar Aga had eclipsed him completely, a shift that reflected the growing political importance of the harem itself. The eunuchs were the ultimate keepers of secrets. They facilitated forbidden communications, smuggling letters and gifts for a price. They were also the purveyors of luxury goods, controlling the black market within the palace walls. If a concubine wanted a rare French perfume or a piece of Venetian lace, she went to a eunuch. If she wanted a fast-acting poison that left no trace, she also went to a eunuch. They were the silent enablers of both the harem's pleasures and its horrors. The night of Kösem Sultan's assassination perfectly illustrates their pivotal role. The plot to kill her was hatched by her rival Turhan Sultan, but it was executed by the chief black eunuch Süleyman Aga and his men. He was the one who personally organized the death squad. He was the one who led them to Kösem's hiding place, and he was the one who stood and watched as the most powerful woman in Ottoman history was murdered. He had chosen a side. His support for the young Turhan tipped the balance of power and ended an era. It was a stark reminder that in the harem, no one, not even the mighty Valide Sultan, could rule without the consent of the men who held the keys to their gilded cages. This dynamic was not unique to the Ottoman court. Across the East, wherever the institution of the harem existed, these shadow armies of eunuchs played a similar role. Yet the specific flavor of cruelty, the scale of luxury, and the scope of female power varied dramatically. In neighboring Persia, the paranoia of the Shahs created a harem that was less a political institution and more a death camp draped in silk, while far to the southeast, in the dazzling courts of the Mughal Empire, one woman would shatter every precedent, ruling not from the shadows, but from the back of a war elephant. The gilded cage of the Ottoman harem, for all its brutality, operated on a system of cruel but predictable logic. In Safavid Persia, under rulers like Shah Abbas the Great, logic was a luxury the court could not afford. The Shah's harem in Isfahan was a place of breathtaking beauty and bottomless paranoia. Shah Abbas, a military genius and a brilliant administrator, lived in constant terror of being overthrown by his own sons, a fear stoked by the whispers emanating from the harem's marble halls. His solution was as direct as it was barbaric. He had his eldest son and heir executed and blinded his other two sons, rendering them ineligible for the throne. The harem, instead of being a nursery for future rulers, became a holding pen for doomed princes. The concubines lived in a state of perpetual fear, knowing that a single unsubstantiated rumor, a jealous rival's lie, could lead not only to their own death, but to the execution of their entire family. Here, the struggle was not for power, which was an impossible dream, but for mere survival. The air in the Persian harem was thick, not with the scent of roses and jasmine, but with the metallic tang of fear. It was a world where a misplaced word was a death sentence, and the Shah's favor was as fleeting and as dangerous as a lightning strike. Contrast this landscape of terror with the opulence and staggering influence of the harem in Mughal India. While the Safavids purged their dynasty, the Mughals were busy building an empire of legendary wealth and cultural brilliance. The Mughal harem, known as the zenana, was a sprawling city within a city, employing thousands of women, servants, and guards. It was a place of immense luxury where empresses commanded fortunes that would dwarf those of their European counterparts. And at the apex of this world stood a woman who broke every mold, Nur Jahan. Born Mihr-un-Nisa, the daughter of a Persian nobleman, she married the Mughal Emperor Jahangir in 1611. Jahangir was a capable ruler, but also an opium and alcohol addict, increasingly indifferent to the daily grind of governance. Nur Jahan stepped into this vacuum with breathtaking confidence. She was not content to whisper advice from behind a lattice screen. She became the de facto sovereign of the Mughal Empire, the most powerful woman in the world at the time. A woman who ruled openly and with an iron fist. In the Mughal court, ambition wasn't a secret to be hidden. For Nur Jahan, it was a banner to be flown from the highest tower. Nur Jahan's power was absolute and public. She was the only Mughal empress to have coins struck in her own name, alongside her husband's. Official documents were issued with her seal. She held her own court, the Jarokha, where she would appear before the public to dispense justice, a privilege previously reserved for the emperor alone. She was a brilliant administrator, a sharp diplomat, and a connoisseur of art and architecture, but she was no delicate flower. Nur Jahan was a crack shot with a musket and a courageous military strategist. In one famous incident, when her husband was taken hostage by a rebellious general, she didn't panic or negotiate. She mounted a war elephant, personally led a charge across a raging river under heavy fire, and rallied the imperial troops in a desperate attempt to rescue him. Could you imagine the queens of Europe leading cavalry charges? Nur Jahan was a force of nature, a ruler in every sense of the word. Her story demonstrates that the harem was not a monolithic institution. It was shaped by the culture and the personalities that inhabited it. Her reign, however, was not without its bloodshed and intrigue. She ruthlessly promoted her own family, the junta, to the highest positions in the empire, creating powerful enemies among the old nobility. Her primary rival was Jahangir's son and heir apparent, Prince Khurram, the future Shah Jahan, builder of the Taj Mahal. The conflict between the empress and the crown prince was a decade-long Cold War that occasionally flared into open battle. Nur Jahan favored a different prince, her son-in-law Shahryar, as the successor. She plotted against Khurram, trying to undermine his position and diminish his military commands. Khurram, in turn, went into open rebellion against his father, a rebellion that was largely a proxy war against his stepmother, Nur Jahan. The empire was torn apart by the ambitions of these two titanic figures. It was a battle for the future of the dynasty, and Nur Jahan played the game with the same ruthless skill as any male monarch. In the end, she lost. When Jahangir died, Khurram's forces outmaneuvered hers. He seized the throne as Shah Jahan and executed her preferred candidate. Nur Jahan was placed under house arrest, living out the rest of her days in quiet exile, a retired empress, a lioness in winter. Her fall was as dramatic as her rise, a reminder that even for the most powerful woman, power was never guaranteed. Her story, a saga of open warfare and public rule, stands in stark contrast to the hidden, cloistered struggles in other lands. For an even more refined, more systematic, and arguably more psychologically brutal version of the harem, we must travel further east to the silent, sprawling labyrinth from which the celestial emperor ruled all under heaven, the forbidden city of China. The world of the imperial Chinese harem was a universe unto itself, governed by millennia of tradition and a bureaucracy so intricate it would have impressed the most fastidious Ottoman administrator. Here, within the vermilion walls of the Forbidden City in Beijing, lived thousands of women whose sole purpose was to serve the Son of Heaven, the Emperor. It was the most structured and hierarchical of all harems. Every woman from the empress down to the lowest-ranking palace maid had a specific rank, a specific salary, a specific allotment of silk, and a specific place in the cosmic order. This was not a chaotic battle for favor. It was a deadly, silent chess match played according to ancient and unforgiving rules. The ultimate prize was not just influence, but the chance to give birth to the heir. A woman who bore the emperor a son, especially the firstborn, could leap from obscurity to a position of immense power. This biological imperative turned the harem into a cauldron of jealousy and intrigue, where the preferred weapons were not daggers, but slow-acting poisons, malicious rumors, and carefully deployed black magic. The hierarchy was a dizzying pyramid. At the top was the empress, Huangho, the emperor's one official wife and the mother of the nation. Below her were various ranks of consorts: imperial, honored consorts, imperial concubines, and so on, down through a dozen or more grades to the unranked palace ladies-in-waiting. A woman's position determined everything: the quality of her food, the number of her eunuch servants, the fabric of her clothes. Promotion was possible, but it was a treacherous climb. The most common method of eliminating a rival was to accuse her of witchcraft, a crime punishable by a slow and painful death, or to orchestrate a miscarriage that was, in fact, a carefully administered abortion using traditional herbs. In this claustrophobic world, a friendship was a temporary alliance and a smile was a carefully calibrated threat. The atmosphere was one of icy etiquette masking a relentless psychological war. Here, cruelty was an art form, refined over centuries to be as elegant and as deadly as a sliver of jade. No story better illustrates the terrifying potential of this system than that of Wu Zetian. Her journey from a fifth-tier concubine in the 7th century Tang dynasty to the only woman to ever rule China as emperor in her own right is a saga of ambition so profound it borders on the demonic. She entered the harem of Emperor Taizong as a teenager. She was beautiful and intelligent, but failed to capture his favor and languished in obscurity. Upon his death, she, like all his childless concubines, was sent to a Buddhist convent to live out her days as a nun. For most, this would have been the end of the story. For Wu Zetian, it was merely an intermission. While in the palace, she had begun a secret affair with the crown prince, Li Ji. When he became Emperor Gaozong, he brought her back from the convent and into his harem, to the horror of his court. Her rise from there was meteoric and utterly pitiless. Her main rival was the reigning Empress Wang and the favored noble consort Xiao. Wu Zetian knew she could not defeat them with simple charm. She needed a masterstroke of pure, unadulterated evil. In the year 654, she gave birth to a daughter. One day, Empress Wang, who was childless, came to visit the infant. After the empress left, Wu Zetian allegedly entered the room, smothered her own newborn daughter to death, and covered the body with a blanket. When Emperor Gaozong arrived, she tearfully discovered the dead child. The last person seen with the baby had been Empress Wang. The implication was monstrous but effective. The emperor, enraged and heartbroken, believed Wu Zetian's silent accusation. Empress Wang was deposed and imprisoned, along with her ally consort Xiao. Wu Zetian was elevated to empress, but she was not finished. She later had her former rivals executed in a gruesome manner. Their hands and feet were cut off, and they were thrown into vats of wine to drown. She reportedly said, "Let these two witches get drunk to their bones." This one act, the murder of her own child to frame a rival, reveals a mind for whom power was the only morality. It's a chilling testament to the pressures and temptations of the harem system. Could you sacrifice your own flesh and blood for the chance to wear the dragon robes? For Wu Zetian, the answer was a resounding yes. Her reign as Empress Consort, and later as Empress Dowager, and regent for her sons, was a masterclass in political maneuvering. She systematically eliminated her enemies, using a brutal secret police force to torture and execute anyone who opposed her, including numerous members of the imperial family and high-ranking officials. Finally, in the year 690, she cast aside all pretense. She deposed her own son, declared the founding of a new dynasty, the Zhou, and ascended the throne as Huangdi Emperor. Not Empress, but the male title, a move of unparalleled audacity. She ruled for 15 years, a capable and effective, if tyrannical, sovereign. She expanded the empire, reformed the government, and was a great patron of Buddhism. Her story is a paradox. She was a murderer, a tyrant, a usurper. She was also one of the most brilliant political minds in Chinese history. Her path to power, paved with the bodies of her rivals and even her own children, represents the ultimate expression of the harem's dark potential. It demonstrates how an institution designed to control and contain women could, in the hands of a truly extraordinary individual, become a launch pad to absolute, unprecedented power. While Wu Zetian was a native product of the Chinese system, the Ottoman harem, in a strange twist of fate, would often find its most powerful rulers not among the locals, but among the pale-skinned captives brought in chains from the West. The vast, anonymous tide of women flowing into the Ottoman harem was not composed solely of nameless villagers from the steppes. Occasionally, the unpredictable currents of piracy and warfare would sweep a truly unexpected prize into the Sultan's collection, a European noblewoman. These women, raised in the courts of Venice or the chateau of France, brought with them a different perspective, a different education, and often a network of contacts that could be turned into a powerful political weapon. Their stories are tales of astonishing adaptation, of women who turned the tragedy of their enslavement into a platform for unimaginable power. They were not just survivors, they were cultural translators, spies, and diplomats who navigated the treacherous waters between East and West. Their presence added a new layer of intrigue to the harem, transforming it into a clandestine arena for international diplomacy. A whispered word from one of these women into the Sultan's ear could alter the course of a war or seal a trade alliance worth millions. They were the ultimate Trojan horses, though it was often unclear whose side they were truly on. One of the most remarkable of these figures was a woman believed to be Cecilia Venier Baffo, the illegitimate daughter of a Venetian nobleman who would later become the Doge of Venice. Captured by the corsair admiral Hayreddin Barbarossa in the mid-16th century, she was presented to the imperial harem. There, she was given the name Nurbanu, meaning Princess of Light. Her sharp intellect and Venetian cunning caught the eye of Prince Selim, one of Hurrem Sultan's sons. She became his favorite, and when he ascended the throne as Selim II, the Sot, Nurbanu became the Haseki Sultan. While her husband dedicated himself to poetry and wine, Nurbanu effectively ran the government in concert with the Grand Vizier. She was fiercely pro-Venetian in her foreign policy, corresponding directly with the Doge and Catherine de' Medici of France. Her letters reveal a shrewd political operator, using her influence to benefit her homeland while simultaneously strengthening her own position within the Ottoman court. She built a dynasty, placing her son Murad III on the throne and ruling as the first of the truly powerful Valid sultans of the Sultanate of Women. She had transformed from a Venetian captive into the matriarch of the Ottoman Empire, a testament to her extraordinary political skill. Perhaps the most legendary and certainly the most romanticized of these stories is that of Aimée du Bouc de Riveri, a distant cousin of Joséphine de Beauharnais, Napoleon Bonaparte's future empress. As the tale goes, Aimée was sailing home to Martinique from a convent school in France in the late 18th century when her ship was captured by Barbary pirates. She was eventually sent as a gift to the Ottoman Sultan Abdulhamid I. In the harem, she was renamed Nakshidil, embroidered on the heart. The story claims she captured the heart of the Sultan, bore him a son, Mahmud II, and as Valide Sultan, guided her son's sweeping westernizing reforms that would forever change the empire. She is credited with introducing French ideas, hiring French tutors, and steering Ottoman policy in a pro-French direction, effectively acting as an agent of French influence at the heart of the court. It's a fantastic story of espionage, romance, and cultural collision. The only problem? It's almost certainly not true. Historical evidence for Nakshidil's French origins is incredibly thin, but the power of the legend itself is revealing. It shows a deep-seated fascination, both in the West and the East, with the idea of the foreign woman who conquers the conqueror, who uses her alien charm and intellect to master the most closed and secretive institution in the world. The reality for most European captives was far grimmer. Many died from disease or failed to adapt to the harsh discipline of the harem. Some, however, used their unique status to their advantage. A woman who could speak Italian or French was a valuable asset, capable of translating documents or communicating with European visitors. This gave them a sphere of influence denied to other women. There were even stories of daring escapes, though most are likely apocryphal. The walls of Topkapi were notoriously secure, yet the fantasy of escape of a Western woman outsmarting her captors and returning to Christendom became a popular theme in European literature. It was a comforting narrative that reinforced ideas of European superiority while ignoring the more complex reality that many of these women did not want to escape. Where else could a woman, even a noblewoman, in the rigidly patriarchal society of Europe, hope to command armies, dictate foreign policy, and control the finances of a global empire? In a cruel irony, the gilded cage of the harem offered a path to a kind of power that was utterly unthinkable for their sisters back home. These women were not just passive victims of fate. They were active players who learned to leverage their past to build a new future, turning their tragic captivity into a source of unparalleled strength and influence. This ability to weaponize every available asset, including their own education, was the true secret to success in the harem. The institution was not just a school of hard knocks. It was a sophisticated academy where art, poetry, and even architecture were merely different disciplines in the curriculum of power. The image of the harem as a place of languid, uneducated odalisques is a fiction, a fantasy painted by European artists who never set foot inside one. The reality was that the imperial harem was one of the finest educational institutions for women in the world at the time. The curriculum, however, was highly specialized. Its primary purpose was to produce women who were not just beautiful and accomplished, but who were masters of strategy, diplomacy, and administration. The skills they learned, calligraphy, poetry, musical performance, theological debate, were not mere pastimes. They were weapons. A perfectly composed poem presented to the Sultan at the right moment could subtly praise his wisdom while casting doubt on the competence of a rival minister. A deep understanding of Islamic law could be used to justify a political maneuver or to endow a charitable foundation that would win the love of the people and create a vast network of patronage. In the harem, culture was a battlefield, and every art form was a potential instrument of war. Consider the poetic duel. It was not uncommon for rival concubines to engage in contests of verse before the Sultan. On the surface, it was a display of refinement and wit. In reality, it was a life-or-death struggle for favor. A clever couplet could win a night in the Sultan's bed and a promotion in rank. A clumsy metaphor could lead to ridicule and a slow fade into obscurity. The women who excelled, like the famous 18th century poet Fitnat Hanum, became celebrities within the court, their words carrying immense weight. They used their poetry to build alliances, to subtly criticize their enemies, and to shape the political discourse of the palace. An embroidery of a nightingale trapped in a cage was not just a pretty picture. It could be a coded message, a plea for help, or a statement of defiance. Every creative act was imbued with political significance. To survive in this environment, a woman had to be not just cunning, but also cultured. Ignorance was a fatal handicap. This weaponization of culture was most visible in the grand architectural projects undertaken by the harem's most powerful women, Hurrem Sultan, Nurbanu, Safiye, Kosum. These women, were among the greatest builders in Ottoman history. They commissioned magnificent mosque complexes, hospitals, soup kitchens, and caravanserais across the empire. These were not simple acts of piety. They were brilliant political statements. By building a grand mosque in her own name, a Valide Sultan was demonstrating her power, her wealth, and her devotion to the faith, often overshadowing the projects of male viziers. These charitable foundations, or waqfs, provided essential services to the public, which earned these women immense popularity and a loyal base of support among the common people and the religious establishment. If the Janissaries ever got restless and started calling for the Grand Vizier's head, the fact that the Valide Sultan's soup kitchen fed 1,000 poor families every day could be a powerful deterrent against challenging her authority. Architecture was a way of literally cementing their legacy into the stone of the capital city, ensuring they would be remembered long after their rivals were dust. Even the internal administration of the harem itself required a sophisticated education. The institution was a massive and complex household with a budget that sometimes rivaled that of the state treasury. The senior women, particularly the Valide Sultan and the Haznedar Usta, the chief treasurer of the harem, were responsible for managing hundreds, sometimes thousands of people and vast sums of money. They had to be literate, numerate, and skilled managers. They supervised the training of new girls, managed supplies, adjudicated disputes, and maintained discipline. The harem was not run on whims. It was run like a corporation with a clear hierarchy and a strict set of rules. The skills learned here were directly transferable to the governance of the empire. A woman who could successfully manage the tangled finances and rival factions of the harem could certainly handle the egos of the imperial council. This unique education, a blend of high culture and brutal politics, produced a class of women who were uniquely qualified to rule, even if they were never intended to. It was the great paradox of the harem. An institution designed to sequester and control women accidentally became the most effective training ground for female political power in the early modern world. These skills, political, cultural, and administrative, were the keys to survival and success. But what choice did they truly have? Denied a voice in the outside world, they turned the harem itself into their parliament, their courtroom, and their battlefield. Their ambition was forged in the crucible of confinement. Is it fair to judge their ruthless methods without acknowledging the ruthlessness of the system that created them? Every woman in the harem was playing a game she did not invent, but which she had to master or perish. So, a question for you. Which skill do you think was the more essential weapon in this silent war? The political savvy to build alliances and outmaneuver rivals, or the cultural grace to captivate the Sultan and win the hearts of the people? Let us know which one you'd bank your life on in the comments. As the centuries turned, the mighty Ottoman Empire, the terror of Christendom, began to show its age. By the 19th century, it was widely known as the sick man of Europe. The rot that was eating away at its foundations of military and economic power also festered within the walls of the Topkapi Palace. The imperial harem, once the dynamic center of political power and a forge for empresses, slowly degraded into a symbol of the empire's decadence and corruption. It became a money pit, a place of absurd extravagance that drained the state treasury at a time when the empire was teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. The sultans of this era were often weak, paranoid men raised in the suffocating confines of the cafes, or cage, a system that replaced fratricide with lifelong imprisonment for princes. This practice produced rulers who were ill-equipped to govern, prone to madness, and easily manipulated by the factions within their own harem. The game of intrigue continued, but the stakes were no longer the governance of a global superpower, but the petty squabbles of a crumbling dynasty. The spending became legendary. Sultan Abdülmecid I, in the mid-19th century, decided the old Topkapi Palace was no longer fashionable. He commissioned the Dolmabahce Palace, a gargantuan exercise in Rococo and neoclassical excess on the shores of the Bosphorus. Its construction cost the equivalent of 35 tons of gold, nearly a quarter of the empire's annual tax revenue. The harem wing of this new palace was a maze of opulent rooms, but the old political vitality was gone. The women of the harem now competed not to influence state policy, but for the most expensive French gowns, the finest jewels, and the most elaborate carriages. The valide sultans of this period were less like Qasem and more like shopaholics with a national budget, running up colossal debts with European merchants that the treasury was forced to cover. The harem had become a gilded parasite, beautiful to look at, but slowly killing its host. The discipline and purpose that had defined it in the age of Suleiman were replaced by a languid boredom and a desperate pursuit of novelty. In its decline, the harem finally began to resemble the erotic fantasy that Europeans had always imagined it to be, a place of pleasure and idleness divorced from the harsh realities of power. This decay was presided over by rulers like Sultan Abdulhamid II, the last of the truly absolute Ottoman monarchs. He was a man of profound paranoia, ruling from his secluded Yıldız palace with an iron fist and a vast network of spies. His secret police were everywhere, and the harem was no exception. He trusted no one. Every conversation was suspect, every relationship a potential conspiracy. The harem of Abdulhamid was not a place of grand political schemes, but of suffocating surveillance. The women and eunuchs spied on each other, reporting trivialities to the palace officials in the hope of gaining some small favor. The intrigues became pathetic and small-scale. It was a prison in every sense of the word, stripped of the grand prize that had once made the imprisonment worthwhile. Yet, even in this state of decay, the harem could not entirely escape politics. As revolutionary movements like the Young Turks began to gather strength, they saw the harem as a symbol of everything that was wrong with the old regime, its backwardness, its corruption, its despotism, and they began to find ways to infiltrate it. The revolutionaries, educated in Paris and Geneva, understood that the palace was not impenetrable. They found allies within its walls. A disgruntled eunuch, a concubine with a liberal-minded brother, a doctor who treated the women of the harem. These became the conduits for revolutionary ideas. Secret letters and banned newspapers were smuggled inside, hidden in baskets of laundry or boxes of sweets. The story of one of Abdulhamid's own consorts, who allegedly became an informant for the Young Turks, feeding them information about the Sultan's moods and plans, is a testament to the fact that the spirit of rebellion could bloom even in the most suffocating of environments. There were also clumsy attempts to Europeanize the harem. The women were taught to play the piano, to speak French, and to wear corsets under their traditional robes. These changes were superficial, creating a strange and often comical hybrid culture that was neither truly Ottoman nor truly European. It was the culture of an empire that had lost its identity, desperately trying to imitate the West while clinging to the vestiges of its autocratic past. The last bloody intrigues of the harem were played out against this backdrop of impending doom, the frantic shuffling of deck chairs on the deck of a magnificent sinking ship. The great engine of Ottoman power was grinding to a halt, and its central cog, the harem, was about to be shattered forever. The end came with shocking speed. In 1908, the Young Turk Revolution forced Sultan Abdulhamid to restore the constitution. A year later, he was deposed. The centuries-old institution of the imperial harem was living on borrowed time. The final blow fell after the Ottoman Empire's defeat in the First World War and the subsequent Turkish War of Independence. In 1922, the last Sultan, Mehmed VI, fled into exile. In 1924, the new Turkish Republic, under the fiercely secular leadership of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, formally abolished the caliphate. With that single act, the imperial harem, the foundation of the Ottoman dynasty for 600 years, ceased to exist. The order for its dissolution was issued, and a scene of unimaginable chaos and panic ensued. Hundreds of women, aged consorts, young concubines, servants, and their children, who had spent their entire lives in the secluded artificial world of the palace, were suddenly and brutally evicted. They were given a meager severance pay and thrown onto the streets of Istanbul, a city they had never truly seen. The last door of the Golden Cage had been slammed shut, and its inhabitants were now refugees in their own country. Their fates were as varied as they were tragic. For women who had known nothing but unimaginable luxury, who had never handled money or even dressed themselves, the outside world was a terrifying and hostile place. Many of the older women, with no skills and no family to turn to, died in poverty, begging on the same streets where they had once paraded in imperial carriages. Some of the younger, more attractive women were able to make marriages, often to middle-class men who were eager for the prestige of having a palace woman for a wife. A few, using the formidable skills of intrigue and survival they had learned in the harem, managed to thrive. They became successful businesswomen or society hostesses, their old-world courtliness and sharp intellect giving them an edge in the new republic. The eunuchs faced a similar fate. Suddenly unemployed and socially ostracized, many found themselves destitute. The great and powerful Kislar Agas of the past were replaced by bewildered old men selling trinkets in the Grand Bazaar. The liquidation of the harem was a human tragedy on a massive scale, the forgotten collateral damage of a nation's rebirth. The new government, meanwhile, was less concerned with the human cost than with the financial assets. A frantic hunt for the hidden treasures of the sultans began. The palaces were ransacked, their contents catalogued and sold off. Rumors of secret vaults filled with gold and jewels led to walls being torn down and gardens being dug up. The revolutionary government was desperate for cash, and the legacy of the sultans was its greatest asset. The women of the deposed dynasty, the princesses of the blood, were sent into exile along with the male members of the family. Scattered across Europe and the Middle East, they lived out their lives in reduced circumstances, their imperial titles meaning little in the cafes of Paris or the boarding houses of Beirut. Some wrote memoirs giving the world its first, tantalizing and often highly embellished glimpse into the secret life of the harem. These stories, full of romance and tragedy, became bestsellers, feeding a public appetite for the mystique of the fallen empire. One of the last surviving princesses, Duru Shehvar Sultan, the daughter of the last caliph, became a celebrated society figure in Europe, her grace and intelligence a living reminder of the dynasty's former glory. The harem was empty, its polished marble floors now echoed with the footsteps of tourists, not the whispers of concubines. Its secrets seemed to be buried with its last inhabitants. But history is a stubborn ghost. Decades later, as scholars began to sift through the newly opened Ottoman archives, a different picture began to emerge. They found treasury ledgers detailing the harem's vast expenses, diplomatic correspondence written by Valid sultans, and court records documenting palace conspiracies. The discovery of personal letters and diaries provided an unprecedented look into the inner lives of these women, revealing their fears, their ambitions, and their loves. The myth of the harem as a simple bordello began to crumble, replaced by the far more complex and fascinating reality of a political institution run by women. The story was not over. The voices silenced for so long were finally beginning to speak from beyond the grave, and they had a great deal to say about the true nature of power. The harem was dead, but its echo in the mirror of history was just beginning to take shape. For centuries, the Western world looked at the harem and saw an erotic fantasy, a place of languid sensuality painted in the lush colors of Orientalism. Artists like Ingres and Gérôme populated their canvases with nude odalisques, passive and available, creating a myth of sexual paradise that had almost nothing to do with reality. To the east, the harem became a symbol of either the glorious power of the past or a shameful relic of despotism and slavery. Both views were a caricature, a distortion that obscured a far more interesting and terrifying truth. The harem was not a paradise, and it was not just a prison. It was a crucible. It was an arena where the fundamental forces of human nature, ambition, love, greed, and the will to survive, were amplified to an almost unbearable degree. It was the ultimate expression of power in a world where power was officially denied to women. The luxury was a tool, the beauty was a weapon, and the sensuality was a tactic in a political game with the highest possible stakes. The real legacy of the harem is not found in the dreamy paintings of European artists, but in the cold, hard facts of history. It is found in the magnificent mosques that still dominate the Istanbul skyline, built by women who were officially slaves. It is found in the diplomatic archives of Venice and Paris, in letters penned by female rulers who commanded the respect and fear of European kings. It is found in the political DNA of modern Turkey, where the concept of a deep state, of a shadowy power operating behind the scenes, has its roots in the intrigues of the Topkapi Palace. The women of the harem were not passive victims. They were politicians, strategists, and survivors of a system of unimaginable cruelty. They wielded power through their sons, their wealth, and their intelligence. They were kingmakers and dynasty builders. Hürrem, Kosum, Nur Jahan, Vuzetian. These are not footnotes in the stories of great men. They are the stories. They prove that the thirst for power is a universal human trait, one that cannot be contained by walls or laws or social conventions. The discovery in the archives of a harem treasurer's detailed ledger, or the memoirs of a forgotten princess living in exile in Nice, constantly forces us to re-evaluate our understanding. These documents strip away the myth and reveal the machinery. They show us the harem not as a dreamscape, but as a bureaucracy, a deadly, efficient, and utterly fascinating bureaucracy. They allow us to see these women not as one-dimensional fantasies, but as complex human beings who made impossible choices in an impossible world. They fought, they loved, they schemed, they murdered, and they ruled. They were trapped in a gilded cage, but from within that cage, many of them learned to make the whole world dance to their tune. The story of the harem is a timeless lesson in the nature of power. It is never truly given. It is always taken. And it demonstrates that those who are denied a seat at the table will often find a way to rule from the kitchen, the bedroom, or from behind a silken curtain. Their names may have been erased by official histories written by men, but their influence is etched into the very fabric of the empires they helped to build, and, sometimes, to destroy. For centuries, the world has debated the nature of these women and the institution that shaped them. They were slaves who became queens, prisoners who became rulers. They operated within a system designed to control them, yet they bent it to their will, shaping the fate of empires for generations. Now, having journeyed through the blood-soaked corridors and whispered intrigues of history's most formidable female courts, one final question remains for you to answer. Considering the brutal world they were forced to inhabit, were these great women of the harem fundamentally power-mad tyrants who sacrificed humanity for personal gain, or were they survival artists of genius, using the only tools available to them in a desperate fight for life and legacy? Tell us your verdict in the comments. History, after all, is a conversation, and the final judgment has yet to be written.